Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. A very fun video today. We are going to be testing out and taking a look at the very exciting new Natasha Denona Zendo palette. I just got my hands on this thing a couple of days ago. You guys probably knew if you saw the announcement of this palette that this would be one that I picked up. Big fan of the Natasha Denona midi palettes, which are her mid-sized 15 pan $65 eyeshadow palettes. I have all of them now. I've kind of been collecting them. I really do love almost all of them. So I knew instantly I wanted to get my hands on this one. So today we're going to be doing a look with it, obviously. We'll also be looking at the palette as a whole, and we'll be going over a couple of surprising drugstore dupes that I found within my collection that kind of shocked me. By the end of this video, you may find that this is a palette you might already own. We'll get into that at the end. Before we jump in, I want to welcome any new visitors to my channel. So happy to have you here. I hope you enjoy this one. If you do, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure that you are subscribed before you leave. With that said, let's get right to it. All right, you guys, here she is. Very, very shiny. It's going to be really hard to see this palette with my lights here in front of me. Very pretty outside packaging. I'll be honest, the shiny palettes of hers, they get very dirty, very fingerprinted very, very quickly, which it doesn't bother me that much. I don't mind that much, but if it does bother you, just be aware. This is one of those packaging situations that will get dirty very quickly. Here's what it looks on the inside. It is very pretty. It is quite colorful, but these are colors that I myself actually would wear. I'll go ahead and insert for you guys right here a look at the palette, a look at the colors swatched on the arm. This is a very fun color story. It's a very inspiring color story. As I was swatching this for this video, I was really intrigued by the variety of colors in here. I feel like there's a lot of options for color combinations that are kind of unique, which I was excited to see. I'm excited to give it a try on my eyes. I actually haven't used this on my eyes yet, so this will be my first impression, but as I was watching them, these feel like her usual good quality. The mattes, the shimmers, the different varieties of finishes feel really nice. I do love Natasha Denona's eyeshadow quality. I like the different finishes that she offers. I think this is going to be a fun one to play with. So I did just want to show you guys the mini Zendo palette compared to this one. I did already take a look at these two next to each other. I don't see any duplicates of shades in these. There's a lot of differences. So if you were concerned if you already own the mini Zendo, if some of those shades would be repeated in here, they definitely are not. So I want to do the eye look with this palette first, and then we'll get into some of the comparisons or dupes that I may have found in my collection afterwards. So let me zoom you guys in just a little bit and we will give this thing a try. All right, you guys, so I'm really thinking that I want to do something quite colorful today. I'm kind of thinking of going in with some of these pinky peach tones in my transition area and then doing something kind of blue-green. So let's just get to it. We will just kind of see where it takes us. So I'm going to start off with my freshly washed Refer number 16 brush, and I think I want to dip into, let's see, how pink do I want my, let's go pretty bold. So I'm going to go with this shade in the center. This is the shade Relief. I'm going to start placing that all up above my crease. I want quite a bit of this pink to kind of peek out from the colors underneath because we're going to do a lot of blues down here. It's going to be pretty colorful, you guys. This might be the most colorful look I've ever done, with the exception of the Kids Do My Makeup look. I saw that video, which was like a year ago. I think it was like exactly a year ago. I think I did that video at the start of last summer. Okay, this color is very, very pigmented. Oh boy. So that was really just one dip on each side. I'm just kind of going back and forth to get the blend nice and even. By the way, I do have the rest of my makeup on. I will list it down below for you guys, in case you're wondering what else I'm wearing. Okay, so I want to try adding just a little bit of depth to this outer corner. For that, I'm going to use this kind of olivey, green toned brown or brown toned green. Really interesting shade. I love shades like this. I just want to use a tiny bit of this on this outer corner just to add a little bit of depth. This will mostly be topped with the kind of navy blue that we're going to be using, or the steel blue shimmer, but this will give me a little bit more depth than that blue alone would give me. So sorry guys, I'm dealing with a sunrise outside my window that's kind of making my camera a little bit too bright. I keep turning down my settings, but it's hard to keep up with it. So hopefully you guys can see just the level of depth that's giving me. That is seriously deep. So I just wipe my brush off a little bit. I'm just going to kind of feather this in, blend it out a little bit so it's a little bit more diffused. Okay, then I'm going to go back to that fluffy brush, the number 16. I didn't dip into that pink color again. I'm just using what's left on here just to pull some of that pink back. I got that dark shade a little bit high on this corner, so I'm just attempting to kind of fix that a little bit. Now I want to go in with the kind of navy blue. This is the shade Equilibrium. Right here, by the way, I don't think I said this down here. The khaki green is called Zeal. So let's take Equilibrium. I'm going to take that just on my ring finger. And I'm going to apply that on the outer half of my lid. This is a pretty dark shade, so I don't want to go in too far. Oh, I may already have really pretty color though. Back to that tiny blending brush, the Rephr number 14. I wiped it off. I'm just kind of taking this up along this edge to make sure it's nice and blended out. And I'm wiping off in between because I don't want that color to get up too high. I want to maintain that peach color up top there, which is kind of tricky to do. If you blend too much, that dark color is going to move up on top of my, like above my crease, and I don't want it to do that. Now I'm just taking a clean pinky finger. I'm going to pull that along this edge just to blend out this edge so I can go in with something brighter right there. Let's do the same thing on the other eye. Taking my left ring finger, and same thing, I'm just tapping that all over the outer half of this lid. And again, back to that number 14 brush, just running it along this top edge really lightly. And then with a clean pinky finger, again, just kind of pulling that along that edge to kind of diffuse that out. So you can see I have the majority of the color right here. I know it does look a little bit messy right now. We'll come back with a different brush and kind of clean things up once we get towards the end of the look. All right, but now I want to go into this mint shade right here. So I'm going to put this all over the inner part of the lid. This is one of the criticisms I have, I guess, with this. I don't know if I'd call this a criticism, but it's something that you guys might know I'm often criticizing about some of these Natasha Denona palettes, and that is that this specific palette doesn't give you like a standard inner lid or inner corner shade. If you like something really brightening on your inner lid, like a champagne or a shell pink, this doesn't give you anything quite like that. You do get this duochrome, which, don't get me wrong, is a beautiful lid shade, and then you get this mint green right here, which is very light, but it's not something that's necessarily going to go with everything. I mean, there's times that I don't want to put a mint green on my inner lid. That could be either a strike against this palette or a selling point for you if you don't mind reaching for something else when you're wanting to add something to your inner lid. I'm kind of neutral about it now. I don't mind just reaching for like my Super Shock shadow and Ladybird if I want to add something brightening on my inner corner. But it is something to be aware of, because if you like something bright on your inner corner, your only options are color with this palette, which for today is great, but on a everyday basis, when I want something more neutral, this palette is not necessarily a neutral palette. Like, you don't get that staple neutral that I'm always looking for inside a palette. And I don't mean to be super critical. I actually don't mind as much as I think I used to mind. By the way, I'm just taking my pinky finger into this shade Breath. This is such a beautiful shade, you guys. It's a mint green. It is a matte. It is super pigmented and super bright. So I'm putting this all over the inner half of the lid. Then we're going to put the duochrome on top of this shade. That duochrome is more of like a lid topper, kind of slightly more sheer shade, so I think it will actually work really well. That is beautiful. The formula of this shade is really, really nice. All right, so I wanted to go in with this duochrome and pop that over this mint green, but I'm kind of loving the mint green right now. Oh, should I do it? Let's go ahead and do it. Let's take the shade Yama. I'm going to start in the center of my lid. Maybe I just won't go all the way in. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm kind of starting in the center, just right here at the front. I'm kind of putting it right along the lash line, but I want to leave this little section right here with just that mint on it, so you can kind of see all of the different colors. This is actually really, really pretty. Hopefully you can see that. So I kind of just have this little pop of mint right in this inner kind of corner section. I think that looks really, really pretty. Now let's go back to that dark navy shade, the navy shimmer, the shade Equilibrium. I'm going to take this flat shader brush, this is the Rephr number 2, and I'm going to tap just a tiny bit of this navy on the tip of this brush, and we're going to use it just kind of along the lash line and sort of start shaping this outer corner. I'm going to go back to my Rephr number 14 brush, this small blending brush. We're going to take that, actually let's take the peach below the pink. I want to put this on my lower lash line. I just don't want it to be quite as vivid and pink This one's a little bit more muted, but I feel like it will still go well with this shade up here. I want to run some of this down here before I pull some of that navy down along that lower lash line. Okay, so back over to that flat shader brush in the shade Equilibrium. I'm taking just a tiny bit more. Again, I'm just kind of running this kind of along my lashes and then pulling it up kind of in a C shape into this outer corner, and then with what's left, I'm just very lightly pulling that underneath this outer quarter of my lash line, just to give a nice shape right there. See how much better that looks than this side. We'll go into this side now. Fix that one up. So same thing, we're just starting at the lash line, kind of pulling it up towards the corner, and then I like to just kind of go in a more circular shape, because you guys probably know, if you've been watching any of my eye looks or tutorials, I like my outer corner to be a little bit more rounded. Some people don't. If you don't, you can do more of like a V shape. I like it a little bit more round. So I'm going to put just a tiny bit more of that initial kind of salmon color that we put on there. I want to put just a touch more of this kind of up here on this outer corner. Alright, I want to add just a little bit of liner. We're going to take my Wet n Wild Simma Brown now. Then I'll add a couple coats of my Thrive Cosmetics mascara. We'll zoom you guys back out and we will take a final look. Alright you guys, so here is the finished look completed with liner and mascara. Very happy about this makeup look. I had so much fun creating this look, playing with this palette today. This is definitely a little bold, a little colorful for me, but it's not something I'm uncomfortable in. I feel a lot more comfortable with this eye look now that it's completed. I would totally go outside. In fact, I'll go to my son's baseball game in this and wear it with pride. So initially with this palette, when I opened it up, I took a look at this mint shade and thought, that might be kind of fun, but maybe it would have been better replaced with something more traditional, like a champagne or a shell pink, something that's like a staple for me. I actually feel very differently about that now that I have used this shade. This is a really fun shade for your inner lid or your inner corner. Very brightening. It is a matte, but it's a really smooth, creamy matte. I love the subtle pop of color that this gives, but it's still really brightening on my inner lid. Very fun shade to put on your inner lid or inner corner, which I didn't know I would feel that way, so I'm pleasantly surprised about that. As for everything else that I used in here, everything was great. It performed at the high level that I expect her shadows to perform at. All of the formulas were really fantastic so far. I'm excited to give this section over here a try. I feel like this is a little bit more where more neutral looks would lie. Overall, so far, fun palette. Happy to have it. Excited to keep playing with it and experimenting with it. So yeah, I'm very happy with this right now. But I do want to get into some comparisons with this palette. Is this a color story that is completely unique, or do you own other things that are at least similar to this? And I'm surprised to say that you probably do. I first want to mention, I saw that Jen Phelps did a comparison of this palette to the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette, which, by the way, Alter Ego has a dupe for the Metropolis palette, so you may also own that palette as well. I haven't actually done those comparisons, but I will list Jen's video down below in case you want to see how this palette compares to the Metropolis palette. I myself was surprised to see how many similarities she found, but I was even more surprised to see that I found two palettes that I think are quite close to at least a lot of the shades inside here, even a majority of the shades inside here. So let's go through those right now. All right, we're going to start off with comparing this palette to a palette that has been discontinued, but I am quite certain many of you own this palette. And this is the first palette I thought of as I was trying to think of what palettes this reminded me of. And that would be the Kathleen Lights and Colourpop Dream Street palette. I initially thought of this palette looking at some of the deeper greens and blues inside here, but as I opened it, I was surprised to see, okay, there's also a red in here. Oh, look at these browns. Hey, what do you know? Look at that orange or peach shade. Very surprising that there are quite a few duplicates inside here. So let's get to them right now. So I want to first compare the shade that I first thought of, and that is this one right here. So we're going to start with the Dream Street palette. So I have this blue, this kind of oceanic green blue shimmer. This one did remind me a bit of the shade Equilibrium. So let's give that one a swatch. There it is right there. So as you can see, those are quite similar. I think the one from Kathleen Lights might have a little more green, whereas this one has a touch more blue. But overall, very, very close. I also want to compare the matte blue inside here to the matte green. I'm pretty sure these will be a little bit different. Here's the matte blue-green in the Kathleen Lights or Colourpop palette. And then here is the shade Mantra right here in the Natasha palette. So there we have it. Obviously this one is quite a bit more green. This one is more of like a navy blue with a touch of green, but quite similar. The Natasha Denona one is a little bit more creamy. It's kind of, I think it's one of those that is the cream to powder formula. Now I want to take a look at this red right here and compare it to the kind of strawberry shade inside the Natasha Denona. So let's give these a swatch. Here is the Colourpop version. There we have it, kind of an orangey strawberry red. And then this shade right here is the shade Vigor. Okay, so this one's a little bit deeper, a little bit more of a true strawberry. This one has a little bit more kind of rust or orange in it, but pretty similar. Let's do a couple more. I want to compare this shade right here, which is kind of a red toned bronze, this copper color. All right, so there we have the Colourpop. And let's compare that to this shade in the corner, the shade Sense. There we go. Okay, so those are somewhat similar. This one looks a little bit deeper, has a little bit more of like a mauve, a kind of pink or red tone to it, whereas this has a little bit more peach or orange, but they are a little bit similar. Come to think about it, I also want to swatch the shade directly above it that has a little bit more orange in it. This is the shade Aura. And let's just swatch that right up here above the Colourpop one. So those ones might even be more similar. Not exact dupes, but some definite similarities. Just a few more. I want to compare this shade right here in the corner to the pink kind of tone inside, you'll see, in the Natasha palette. So let's start with this one from Colourpop. I love this shade. It is so pretty. Oh, this palette, you guys. If you never got your hands on this palette, I'm so sorry that you missed out because it was a good one. And I want to compare that to this shade right here, the shade Tranquil. I'm feeling this one's going to be a little bit more pink. Let's just see how they look. Yeah, so this one is a little bit more pink. Not exact dupes. I'd say those are actually not as close as I was thinking they might be. And then let's just go ahead and compare the dark browns. As for the like matte light tans or peaches in here, none of them are exact. I did already swatch a couple of these, but let's compare these matte browns. This matte brown in the Colourpop palette, this one right here, is one of my favorite matte browns in my collection, which I feel like is saying something. I mean, you think a matte brown is a matte brown is a matte brown, but I do find differences in all of them. Let's compare that to the shade Mindful. This again is one of her cream to powder formulas. Let's just see how they compare. Okay, those are quite similar. Ooh. This one has a little bit more purple in it. This one has a little bit more red, I guess you would say, or orange. But overall, not too bad. I feel like they're decent comparisons. So those are the shades I found some similarities between. Again, I wouldn't say really any of these are exact dupes, but there's a lot of similarities in some of these shades. I think you get similar looks with this palette that you could with the Natasha Denona. So if you can't afford this one, but you have the Dream Street palette, maybe this will be a good reminder to pull this palette back out because there are some definite similarities. But let's move on to a comparison of a palette. I think I was the most shocked to find as many similarities as I did. I actually thought of this palette for one specific shade that I thought of as I was swatching the Natasha Denona palette. And it was this shade right here that we used on my lid today, the Duochrome. So when I saw that shade and then swatched it, I immediately thought of, this looks just like one of my favorite shades in a really great palette from e.l.f. This is the Retro Paradise palette. This shade right here, the shade Paradiso, is one of my favorite lid shades. I love putting this on my lid. This was one of my favorite palettes from last summer. And I will swatch these shades for you guys and tell you they are very, very close. But after I swatched that shade, I started looking more closely at this palette and found a lot more similarities in this one as well. So we're going to do some more swatches of these two palettes. So let's start with that Duochrome first, starting with the shade in the e.l.f. palette. Again, this is the shade, not Paradiso, it's Paraiso. I don't know why I do that. So here it is right here. And here's the shade Yama from the Natasha Denona palette. Again, can you see how similar these two are? These are always hard shades to pick up on camera. I do think the one from e.l.f. has a little bit more gold in it. This is a little bit deeper, has more of like a brown undertone, whereas this is more peach, but quite similar. Both beautiful shades. Love them both. But there are some other shades in here that I thought were quite similar. Let's start with this blue right here. This reminded me a little bit of the lighter blue in the Natasha Denona. I have a feeling this one might be a little bit more brightening or bold. This is the shade Sip Sip from e.l.f. And then here's the shade Flow from the Natasha Denona palette. So this one's not quite as bright blue, but quite similar. I mean, I feel like on the eyes, those will be pretty darn close. So there's another close dupe. Let's have a look at the matte brown. I want to compare it to this matte brown in the corner. This is the shade Coconut. So let's start with the e.l.f. shade. Here's the shade Coconut. Actually, I can already tell that this one's going to be a little bit less warm than the shade. This is the shade Mindful in the Natasha palette. So yeah, it's a little bit warmer. Let's swatch this shade right here. This is the shade Cacao. I actually think this one's still a little bit more cool toned. It almost has a green tint to it. There it is right there. That actually reminds me a little bit of the shade Zeal, the khaki green here in the corner, and the Natasha Denona palette. So let's swatch that one directly below as well. Okay, those are actually really close. Very close. Do you guys see that? Let's do just a couple more. I think we might have a dupe for this peach matte in this palette. This is the shade Calm. So I'm going to swatch that one here down below. I've been swatching the e.l.f. ones on top. It's a little bit lighter of a shade, kind of a soft peach. Let me give it one more swatch just to try and help that show up a little bit. And that looks a whole lot like this shade Fuego in the e.l.f. palette. Let's do that one on top. Okay, so this one might be a little bit more orange, this one a little bit more pink, but not too shabby. Pretty darn close. Let's swatch those matte reds as well. Let's take the shade Vigor right here. I want to see how this one compares to the red inside the e.l.f. palette. This is a really beautiful shade. And then this shade right here is the shade Spiced. Okay, so the Natasha one is just a little bit deeper, as you can see, but not too bad. Pretty close. I think there's just one more that I wanted to see if we can duplicate. So this shade right here, the bronze inside here, the shade Luster, let's have a look at that one compared to, there's actually two shades in the e.l.f. palette this kind of reminds me of. We'll see which one comes the closest. So I'm going to swatch this kind of in the middle. This is a really beautiful bronze. It's very brightening, but it's not super brassy. It's really pretty. I want to compare that first to this shade right here. This is the shade Fortuna from the e.l.f. palette. Let's swatch that one on top. Okay, quite similar. As you can see, this one's a little bit more yellow in tone. This one's a little bit more kind of peach or bronze or brown in tone. I also want to compare it to the yellow up here. This is the shade Rise and Shine. I feel like this one's probably going to be much more yellow, but maybe a mix between these two would give you this exact shade. So there we have those three compared. I definitely think these two are the most similar. Pretty impressive. So I think that's pretty much it for the comparisons of these two palettes. Let me just hold them up next to each other so you guys can kind of see how they look. I mean, not exact dupes. Actually, I did want to swatch the mint greens in both of these. They don't look that close, and I'm pretty sure the one in the Natasha palette will be quite a bit lighter, but I thought we'd compare them just in case. So I'm going to take the shade from Natasha first. Let's take, that is the shade Breath. This one is pretty light. I know it looks very meh when you swatch it. I mean, on the eyes though, it performs much better than it does in a swatch. It looks a little sheer on the hand, but it's much more impactful on the eyes. I want to compare that to the shade Baha Mar from e.l.f. Okay, yeah, definitely different. This shade is going to be much more bold on your inner corner than this one right here. So that's pretty much it for the comparisons of the Zendo palette to the e.l.f. Retro Paradise palette. Not exact dupes across the board. I think we found about 7 close dupes in here. But that's just one more thing to consider if you're thinking about picking up this palette, or maybe you cannot pick up this palette and you're wishing that you could, but you happen to own this palette. Hopefully that will make you feel a little bit better and get some use out of a palette that you already own in your collection. I was actually really surprised at how many similarities I did find. And I do think there's a lot of similar looks that you could create using the e.l.f. palettes. My final thoughts just after this first impression. Really happy with this one. I think it's going to be a really fun palette to own and to play with. As I mentioned already, I'm a lot more happy with this mint green than I initially thought I might be. I wasn't sure that was a shade I would use very often, but I love how this shade looks on the inner corner. It is so much fun. I'm excited to keep playing with it. Let me know if you guys would like to see me come back and use this palette. I feel like I have said that in the last 5 videos. That's a lot of promises to make, Mandy. I'll do my very best, but let me know if you guys would like to see this. I'm considering doing a 7 looks video with this palette. I have mentioned this before. I'm waiting for baseball playoffs to finish up next week before I can do that 7 looks video. I've just been so busy. Baseball season is nuts. I know I talk about it all the time. It's super obnoxious. But I do promise you guys I will be doing a 7 looks video on one of these palettes very soon. I plan to do a poll, probably on my community tab, perhaps over on Instagram as well. So keep an eye out for that. That poll will probably go up within the next week. I'll give you guys some options on which palette you would most like to see me do 7 looks with. But that is all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for stopping by. Hopefully you guys are all doing well. Let me remind you one more time, if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing that before you leave. But that is all for now. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye. So I want to do, oh my gosh, Mandy. If I'm rushed, I am see, tongue tied. Case in point.